Hello and welcome to Good Clinical, a podcast and YouTube channel dedicated to showcasing the future of medicine and human health. Today's episode is another in our partnership with Te Titoki Mataora, the MedTech Research Translator. Today's guest is Dr. Yaara Yarmut. Yaara is the Chief Regulatory Officer at Alimetry, a medtech company based right here in Auckland, New Zealand. Today we're going to cover a range of topics, including the importance of innovation, but also targeted innovation, making sure that the money goes after the right ideas and we deploy smart money. So Yaara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So you are a veterinarian by trade or by training.
I am.
And you've taken a circuitous route to your current role, shall we say, as Chief Regulatory Officer at Alimetry. How did you get from being a vet to being one of the executives at a medtech company?
I have to say it's been an interesting journey. I think at some point, working as a vet, I felt a little bit more like a mechanic. And I was really, really hungry for the best technology out there. And back then, I was in Israel, and unlike human medicine, in veterinary, we were always 10 years behind. In addition, I was looking to start raising a family, and I wasn't willing to work 24/7. So I looked at medical devices, and I had a lot to look at because it was just everywhere around me, and I grew up in that atmosphere as well. And decided to try. I took 6 months off and decided to try. I wanted to go for clinical trials, preclinical trials, because that was my background, working with animals, and found myself in my first medical device startup, and started from preclinical trials, went into clinical trials. There is always more to do wherever you look when you work at an early stage startup. So I learned a bit of quality, a bit of regulatory, and just developed from there.
Yeah, because going from, imagine being a vet, very defined role and series of tasks that you would do more or less each week regularly, you get that like regularity involved, but then I can imagine pivoting into the medtech space or a startup in particular, you got to wear 10 hats. You're not just doing one role, you're doing 5 or you're doing 10 or one day you're doing something brand new.
Yes, I don't see that actually as that much different because when you have a new case, you never really know what that case is going to be, right? Sometimes it's internal medicine. I was working at the hospital. So I wasn't just doing orthopedics or surgery. I was, whatever was there, I was there to treat. I was working with horses. So, you've got your, I guess, more usual cases, but it's just all hours of the day, and each one of them needs something a little bit different. Right. So that was actually easier.
And how does that compare to now? So being at Alimetry, do we call that a startup? I mean, it's almost it's in that
it's not an early
stage,
yeah. So
right?
it's not an early stage startup.
Yeah.
But
pre-commercial.
We've started commercializing the product already.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. So we're just starting. We're taking those first steps of actually getting out of that startup mode.
Yeah, fantastic. So I imagine, getting into the medical device space, getting exposed to preclinical trials as the products develop. You go from preclinical to clinical. You're building up your regulatory expertise, and that sets you up to the current role that you are now, Alimetry, which we already mentioned, as Chief Regulatory Officer. So that obviously encompasses the beginning to the end, so the preclinical all the way through to the registration level trials.
Yes, some say it's only the beginning, right?
Yes.
Because
And then there's the post-marketing stuff that you have to do as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously the marketing of the product and actually getting the product to the market, to the hands of users, of customers, and making sure that it's safe for use and that it's helping and dealing with issues that come up once the product is at the hands of users. That's a whole other journey, right?
Yeah.
I think until the product is actually in the market, that's, I don't want to say the easy part, but it's easier for us to control to some level. And then this is a whole new journey that we're now on.
Yeah. So for those that maybe don't know about Alimetry and the current status, can you give us a quick rundown of the product and where it is now in that commercial pipeline?
Yes. Yeah. So we're currently, we've developed and started marketing the Gastric Alimetry system, which is essentially an ECG for the stomach, for the gut. And it's made of an array of electrodes that we put on the stomach with a recorder to record myoelectrical signals. So similarly to the heart, but to a much lesser extent. The signals from the stomach are a lot weaker than those that we get from the heart. So that's what we do. So we record these signals and we analyze them. And we enable clinicians to essentially assess whether the stomach is functioning correctly or not.
It's amazing. As a quite a novel concept. When I first heard of it, I was, thinking about the body being awash in like electrical signals. You're like, well, that sounds a little bit crazy. But then you go, well, no, I mean, that's how it's all controlled. Well, how the muscles are controlled and innervated, right? So I suppose you could have not just the ECG of the stomach, there could be the ECG of everything else. I mean, there's the EEG for the brain.
That is
ECG,
true.
like you mentioned.
This is essentially EGG.
Yeah.
Electrogastrogram.
There we go.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. So it's about diagnosing disorders of the stomach if it's not working properly, if it's diseased, or if there's just some interconnectivity that's just not working right.
Yeah, it's we're mainly talking about motility of the stomach, right? So it's not the structural issues, which you're more likely to see with an endoscope. But there is, if you look around you, there are so many people that suffer from gastric symptoms. And some of them, when the symptoms are more severe and they actually interfere with their quality of life, they go on this endless journey trying to find out what is wrong. And we're trying to simplify this journey, to shorten it, and to provide them with answers that would enable them ultimately to get the right treatment.
So is it about getting to an actionable diagnosis sooner by ruling out certain other things or ruling in certain diagnoses that can be detected by measuring the electrical signal?
Yeah, it's a physiological test, and we're aiming to understand, to get a better understanding of the stomach's physiology. And basically understand whether the symptoms that a person is experiencing, whether it's likely that they come from the stomach doing something wrong, or whether we should look at someplace else.
Yeah. So Alimetry is kind of lauded within the New Zealand MedTech startup space as being one of those companies up there with, someone referred to Alimetry as a future Fisher & Paykel Health. A MedTech company that's making waves, good innovation, a great product, a good team.
Great team.
So where, from your perspective, what's next on the, not chopping block, what am I trying to say? What's next on the activity list? So you've got this product that works, you've done your registration activities, where to next from a regulatory standpoint?
From a regulatory standpoint. So ultimately, it's getting access to additional markets and maintaining market access in existing markets with a product that is just starting its it's just starting its journey out there. So there's always room for improvements. It's never that first product that's there and going to stay there without changes, especially nowadays when software is incorporated in basically almost every medical device out there.
Yeah. And you're gathering so much data, the data sets must be just growing by the second with every use, and then you can interrogate those data sets with novel tools, AI, machine learning or whatever, to really figure out more unique, idiosyncratic kind of signals. Yeah, it's amazing stuff. So right now, you've registered in the US and New Zealand, is that correct?
So we've got market clearance in the US. Yes, we're marketing the product in New Zealand as well as in the UK.
Oh, the UK.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
And then all the other countries can come a little bit later.
Yes, they will.
So those are the main markets, right? I imagine Europe's next.
We've got a few markets on our list before Europe.
Okay. Oh, very good.
Europe is a huge market, but it's not an easy market to penetrate.
They like to make things very, very difficult.
It's not just that. It's not just Europe, right? You get the EU MDR, but then behind that, you've got 20-something countries, and each country, each member state has its own additional requirements and languages and reimbursement. And its own health system.
Yeah, so it's almost like on the surface it seems like an easy get, but once you get beyond that universal step, you've still got to do all these other activities to satisfy the unique country requirements. Right. Really interesting. So I can imagine someone like yourself, you're not content with just working on this one thing, but you also, I can tell that you've got a lot of passion and energy for this innovation and moving things forward. So let's talk about how you got involved with the Te Titoki Mataora Advisory Board, because that's what that is at its heart, right? Enabling future innovation. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we get from, adding more to your plate?
I don't see it as adding more to my plate. I think I was really lucky to be introduced to Alimetry's founders, and just because we started from the university, I had a chance to actually see other projects, and that's how I met Diana Sue, and she got me involved with TTM. But I was already really passionate about helping the industry to develop and just be more. I think I want to say be more knowledgeable about what's involved when with developing a medical device. There is a lot there. It could be a very painful journey, and finding out what's needed late in the process can actually kill a project. So I think I felt that it was, if I could, I should help these early stage projects make more informed decisions and get ready for what's ahead fairly early in the process. And I believe that the scientific advisory group helps me do that as part of the team that we are, because we get access to all these projects that apply for funding. And more than money, I really want to provide them with some feedback and recommendations on the must-dos and
Must avoid.
And please avoid.
Yeah, because it's you don't develop an industry overnight, right? Or you don't develop an ecosystem overnight. It's a step-by-step process, and it requires a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but it also requires a vanguard, a group that kind of moves into that operation and then makes it available for other people to also come in behind them, right?
Yes.
But if the vanguard just goes in and then takes all their riches and wealth and success away with them, then the other people are left kind of like defenseless and unsupported. So it really requires people that, yes, you might have had some success in your previous pursuits, your startup pursuits, your entrepreneurial pursuits, but you almost have like a bit of an obligation to share those with everyone else.
I fully agree.
Yeah, because without it, I mean, you just kind of those skills would not be passed on. Because we often think, I mean, I can imagine that you, in your regulatory career, you didn't learn everything at university. I mean, you were
I didn't learn anything at university.
You learned it all on the job, right? So we kind of think that you're going to be fully set up once you've done a university degree to carry yourself through, but you're not.
Yeah, I actually probably learned everything, or now I can say most of what I know, in the hardest possible way and the worst possible way, because I made mistakes. All of my positions ever, in all the medical device startups that I worked for, I always walked into a void.
Yeah.
So except for the first one, and that was clinical trials, I always walked into a startup that told me either the person left or it never existed. So there was no one to learn from. The budget was always too low to provide me with good training. And I think I probably also didn't know how to ask. But I learned it myself. So it was really hard, but it was interesting. And I think that's why I have some interesting stories. I think I learned more from my mistakes than I learned from doing things the right way.
Yep, definitely. I mean, you always you learn faster riding a bike by falling over a few times and knowing what not to do than getting it right.
Exactly.
Straight away. Because New Zealand, it's an interesting location because we are a little bit further away from the world on the map for the rest of the world, the big markets. We're about as far away as you can get from Europe, and not quite as far, but still very far away from the US.
Yes.
Asia is an up-and-coming place. It's kind of far removed from that too. Don't have a huge population, have this bizarre obsession with selling houses to each other and doing a bit of farming. And I often say, like doing those two activities might make you a nice, developed nation, but it's not going to keep you in that developed nation spot forever if you don't innovate, right? So we're in a tricky spot because to do good innovation, regardless of which pursuit, you need capital, you need facilities, you need infrastructure, and you need people.
And you need a good regulatory framework.
Yeah. Ah, yes. Is that part of, can we loop that into infrastructure? Because I can't think beyond three levels.
Yes, let's go with that.
Yeah. But the human capital side of things, again, going back to the point earlier, like people like yourself that have had that success or that experience, passing it on by way of advisory groups is fantastic. Preventing people from making mistakes in the future because you can see it happen before they can, making sure that the limited resources, whether it be money being thrown at these projects, doesn't get wasted on pursuits that clearly are not going to make their way through. So I think it's a fantastic thing. So when you're in as part of these advisory groups, are you making absolute decisions on whether or not they can get funded, or is it kind of like a peer review and advisory?
It's a peer review and advice. So ultimately, we come up with our suggestions, our recommendations, and we send it back to the TTM executive group to actually let the projects know which are funded and which are not.
Have you ever been in a situation where you've fundamentally disagreed with a project and outright said no, not worth it?
Yes.
Yeah. What's the ratio of yeses to nos?
My ratio?
Do you have a higher bar than most?
To some extent, yes. I think that when I look at a project, and it's hard for me to look at a project and see it as something that is going to be successful if it is only meant for the local market. Because, as you mentioned, the local market is small. And we need revenues, right? We need money to actually continue improving the product and then getting a better product to the market and to pay our employees. And so if it's a simple project that I think can get there, then that's fine. But when it comes to the more complicated projects, if I really think that they're not fit for purpose outside of New Zealand, then I have a hard time saying yes. However, it's not a hard no in these cases because of the conditions under TTM, and I go with that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, New Zealand has this funny posture whereby if things aren't an overnight success, they're kind of deemed as being a failure. And I've been talking with a few companies about this, and we did that 1 year. Say it's an initiative. We did that 1 year and it didn't work out, so we're not going to do that again. It might be attending some conference or investing money in this. And I don't know if that's by virtue of us being a predominantly a farming nation, or like the overnight returns that people kind of got from, again, selling houses in the short term. But like these kind of things, they take a long time to build, and they're going to require a few people making mistakes, and they're going to require a few on paper wasted resources, for unsuccessful things. But it all builds up this capacity and picture and expertise and rigor in the system. So that's why I think, initiatives like TTM are fantastic, because they have that commitment over multitudes of years to provide these opportunities. Yeah.
I fully agree. And look, you need the unsuccessful project as well.
Yeah.
You can't build an industry and that only builds on successful projects. It's just it never works, right? But going back to what you said before about being very quick to say, "Nah, I tried that." This is not actually what I'm seeing. I'm actually seeing very devoted people that continue to advocate for their ideas and their solutions, and try to find their way, sometimes for years. I think one of the problems is going back to the regulatory framework. If you look at countries where this industry is flourishing, it's usually countries that have a higher regulatory bar. When locally, before even stepping a foot outside your own country, your own jurisdiction, when you're required to properly prove efficacy, to properly show safety, you are going to work harder to get your device there. When you work with essentially no regulatory framework and everything is pretty much a suggestion, there is nothing up there for you to meet. So even if it's average, that's okay. I don't actually need to prove my capability to some extent. And I go with the local market because it's easy. Whereas if that same project was located and based in the US or in Europe or even in Australia, and they had to do right from day one, they had to do a lot more, they would have, I think, they would have approached that project differently.
Interesting.
And it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg, but I think actually raising the bar and creating a bit more of a rigid or an existent regulatory framework is not essentially an innovation killer. I think it's an enabler. If you do it right, it's an amazing enabler. For the patients. For the clinicians, but also for you as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a manufacturer. It's
interesting because I suppose if you've got a low bar to clear, you have the short-term success quickly in a small market, and then a very steep battle to fight to get into a more rigorous market. And if it's not New Zealand, it's going to be bigger. Interesting. Whereas you're kind of thinking about that rigor from the outset if you have a more comprehensive framework in place. So from your perspective, what would be the longest lever that we could pull to invigorate the ecosystem here in New Zealand? If you were God and you could press a button or pull a lever on only one, what would it be?
I would say a good regulatory framework, and we have to channel more funds. They go together. So it's the regulatory framework, it's channeling more funds, and getting talent. So there is a limit to what you can get out of a small group of people that keep sharing the same ideas. Even if they're amazing ideas, you, in order to continue growing, at some point you need to bring in something fresh. It's the same as when you look at a growth of a company and bringing in external resources sometimes to train your employees and actually to grow within.
Provide fresh perspectives and ideas and excitement. That's the problem of being relatively small. You even if you have, I don't know, 5, 10 conferences a year, if you keep bringing the same people to these conferences, there will be a limit to
to the new content that they can bring, to how much they can teach the local talent. So it's either bringing the talents themselves and hiring from outside of New Zealand, or bringing these talents to teach the local
I had this
industry.
exact discussion with a venture capitalist on this podcast, and he said one of the tricky things is that, you know, we've got a small country, small population, can't pay as high wages, and housing is also really expensive here. So attracting talent can be quite tricky. Not impossible, but it's quite tricky, because if you're saying, oh, someone could make probably double the money in the US.
Yes, to some people, yes. Some people it will be really hard to bring here. But New Zealand also has a lot to offer that's beyond a paycheck. I didn't come to New Zealand for the paycheck. I came for the quality of life. I came for my kids. And I think that you'd be surprised at how many people would happily come.
Yeah, I'm always reminded how good New Zealand is every time I leave and then come back. I went to the States twice in the last year, and like each time I come back, I'm like, man, this place is awesome. Yeah. So you mentioned the regulatory framework. What would that look like if it could be changed?
What would that look like? It would mean that there is someone at the gate, okay, saying, this is what you need to show us if you want your product to be sold in New Zealand, to be used on patients, and that show us can be either showing you evidence, and that's a pretty expensive way to go at it, because you need to have behind that, you need to have a lot of people with the expertise to review those documentation and those files, and assess the products and evaluate them, and it costs the manufacturer money as well, right? Someone needs to cover that. Because we're a small country, that I believe that will actually be something that would lead manufacturers to avoid bringing products into this market, because there is a limit to the revenues that they'll make here, right? What we can do, we're surrounded by countries that are very highly regulated, very reputable, and countries that we can trust their regulatory frameworks. And so if we can leverage on that, right? So if we've got a product that comes with clearance from, it could be TGA, it could be FDA, EU MDR, that could actually help us here, and make it a lot more efficient and also cheap.
Yeah. So right now is the framework such that for medical devices that it's kind of amorphous, don't know what you need to demonstrate, it's not immediately clear what it needs to be required for a particular type of device?
So at the moment, what happens is that there is hardly anything that you need to show, to declare when you register your device on WAND database. And there are two declarations there, essentially. And the first one is something that you have to agree to. And the second one that actually talks about the essential principles, and in that is all the safety and performance aspects. That's a recommendation.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Gosh, so the bar is very low.
The bar is very low.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so a better regulatory framework, more money, more funds flowing in an investment, and then more people.
Yes.
Yeah, infrastructure, capital, and human capital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, when I came to New Zealand, and I started getting a sense of the industry here, what I saw was that even the local venture capitals, they are intimidated by, or they're avoiding the higher risk products.
Mm-hmm.
And it was always better go for the lower risk products.
Yeah.
And that's also a sign of the small small industry,
Yep.
I guess, that was existing here at the time. I think we've progressed a lot since, but there's still a lot of work on that front as well.
Absolutely. Well, Yaara, this has been really interesting. If people want to find out more about yourself or Alimetry, where can they go?
They can go to our website.
Yep.
Yes, we've got a lot of information on our website.
Awesome.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your time. And
Thank you.
we'll be closely watching what Alimetry gets up to next, and seeing where TTM takes the industry forward.
Yes, it's an amazing initiative, and I'm hoping that more and more projects are going to approach us for funding.
Absolutely.